And I'm going to start the broadcast in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. This is Steve Cantrell with the DBA Fundamentals virtual chapter meeting for December. Our presentation today is solving the accidental DBA problem. It's going to be presented by Thomas LaRock and Karen Lopez, or better known as SQL Rockstar and Data Check. I'll be turning things over to Tom and Karen in a minute, but I want to bring a few things to your attention first. First, I'd like to thank PASS, the Professional Association of SQL Server, for supporting our chapter. I'm the chapter co-vice president of DBA Fundamentals. You can send any of us questions by emailing us. You can get our contact information under the About Us tab at fundamentals.sqlpass.org. On January, for our January's first meeting in January, we'll have Ayman El Ghazali presenting a session called Performance Tuning Pit Stops for DBAs. Be sure to sign up for that. We're going to try to start 2015 out strong by doubling up through our sessions through March. We'll have Ayman again on January the 6th. On January the 20th, we'll have Kimberly Tripp. February the 3rd, we're going to have Joey D'Antonio. February the 17th, we'll have Glenn Berry. And March the 3rd, we'll have Deanie Cherry. Information will be coming out soon about all of these. Sign-ups are available already for the January 20th session. This session will be recorded and will be available in an archive session within a week. It'll probably be there before a week, but give us at least that much time because we do have our day jobs too. You can get to it through our archived area on our website or through our YouTube channel at DBA Fundamentals. We should be able to get the slides and scripts from Tom and Karen put on our site, and you can probably get them from them also, but we'll have them on our site. Okay, that's all the housekeeping I can think of. So today we have Thomas LaRock and Karen Lopez presenting Solving the Accidental DBA Problem. I'm going to quickly turn it over to them because they probably need no introduction anyway, and they'll have introduction in their slides. So over to you, Karen and Tom.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Tom. And Karen and I are here to talk to you a little bit today about what we call solving the accidental DBA problem. And this may or may not be something familiar to you. Let's see. I need to get control here. There we go. This may be somewhat familiar sight for some of you. At some point in your career, you came across the fact that you were the new DBA. And there's a lot of different ways that this may have happened to you. In one, it could be simply that you were, say, volunteered to be the new database administrator. Maybe for a short period of time you said, oh, I can take care of that backup and that restore while the regular DBAs are on vacation. Maybe somebody just sort of said, hey, we have this database. Can you just take a look at it, help us out with it, until we can find someone better for the role. There's lots of different ways that you end up becoming a DBA. Very few of us ever set out to actually be the DBA. So we all kind of talk about this thing being the accidental DBA. And that's what Karen and I have put together this presentation today. Talk a little bit about that, how it happens, what you can do about it, how to be successful in case it ever happens to you. So a little bit about me. I already said my name's Tom. Microsoft Certified Master. I'm a SQL Server MVP. I sometimes tweet, I sometimes blog. I work for SolarWinds. Used to be Confio Software. We were bought last year. Now part of the SolarWinds family. Member of PASS. I am on the board of directors for PASS. I currently serve as president. And you can reach me at SQLRockstar@thomaslarrock.com. I was a production DBA for 7 years for a financial services company. And yes, I was an accidental DBA. Karen, a little bit about you.
Yep. Oh. Can you advance the slide? There we go. Sorry.
Sure.
Me.
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Karen. I tweet a lot at Data Check, and I blog at InfoAdvisors plus some other places. I'm a senior project manager and architect of Microsoft MVP and a Dun & Bradstreet MVP. I'm also the chapter leader for the Toronto SQL Server user group. and I tend to use all kinds of social media a lot. And I just want you to love your databases, your data, as much as you love your databases. So today, what we're going to talk about is how to make the transition from being an accidental DBA to an on-purpose DBA, which in most of our slides we call professional DBA. And we're going to start with some questions about how the heck did this happen to you. And then Tom's going to go through the 5 DBA food groups so how to make that transition. I'm going to talk a little bit about doing it right, how to have happy data, databases, and users, and then we'll go through 7 tips and a bunch of resources to solve this problem of being the accidental DBA. So the first thing I have is a poll for you all. And what I need to know is, and you can check more than one here, how did you become an accidental DBA? And if you're an on-purpose DBA, then I need to know, what do you think are the #1 reasons? But I think most of us started working with databases because we fell into it or something. So the poll's just chugging along. I'm going to give you about 20 more seconds.
Well, I'm surprised there's quite a bit saying that they wanted it to happen. Nobody wants this to happen.
Isn't that crazy? Some people just have that in them.
I'm thinking our target audience, these are the crazy ones, the ones that turn up for this.
Yeah, the people who show up to web. So about 3/4 of you, I'm going to give a couple more seconds so we can get about 80% of you voting. And come on, people who are checking your email and tweeting and Facebooking while you're on the web.
We have somebody who said auditors happened. I like that.
Yeah, I know. I know. Okay, so 3 more seconds, last chance. Oh, there we hit 80. Okay, I'm going to close it now. And now I'm going to share it. So hopefully you can see the poll results. I don't get to see the screen for that. But yeah, actually, I'm kind of surprised, Tom, aren't you, that 62% wanted this DBA stuff to happen? And
well, 62% of our audience, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we're the 1%, right? So about 20%, someone else quit, and so you got the DBA crown. Almost 10%, some disaster happened. One person probably had auditors happen saying, hey, you don't have any DBAs. And about 37% said that you were volunteered. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised by that. So that's interesting. Sounds like something to blog about. Okay, there we go. So what do you do now that you've become an accidental DBA? Well, the first thing is don't panic. I mean, I'm a project leader and an architect, which means sometimes I have to fill in and be an accidental DBA, and that's really scary.
Karen,
yes?
I'm still just seeing a quick poll. I don't see a presentation right now.
Oh, I have to hide it. Sorry.
Okay. So
now
I see it. Yep, got it.
Okay, excellent. So the first thing is don't panic. This is one of the traits, as we're going to talk about the traits of a professional DBA, is that you have to have the type of mindset of, you know, not just starting pulling wires out of the back of servers because something's not working. You know, if your mouse isn't working, you don't start unplugging everything in the back of your machine. But Tom's written about this in his book, DBA Survivor, where he talks about a lot of these topics. And Tom, you have some things to talk about what you have in common with the president.
Yeah, so when I wrote the book 4 years ago, I was thinking about how a lot of people talk about how when you become a DBA, one of the things you want to do is you figure out what you're going to do in your first 100 days. And it kind of just made me think about how that's the same thing when the president takes office, right? He comes into office and he says, all right, in the first 100 days I want to accomplish this sort of thing. And that's kind of the mindset that I tried to instill in people when I was writing that chapter. I said, all right, just instead of this kind of a daunting thing, especially if you've been volunteered for it, right? If somebody else quit and you kind of have to be the new DBA and you have to take this on and you don't really have a lot of guidance from somebody. A lot of times we work kind of alone. People don't even know what we do, right? So I tried to put some structure around it, and I said, if you had to do things in a certain 100 days, what would it be, and what would you attack? And you can find a lot of things on the internet. Brad McGehee used to do a lot of writing about what you should do when you're first starting out as a DBA. So certain things, you know, they say check backups, stuff like that. I talk about how recovery is job one. If you can't recover, then they're really going to question why they have you. That is the number one thing that you have to be able to do as a DBA. So I kind of put a lot of focus on that. Of course, people also say that there's more than just recovery, or that's just one of the job ones, right?
But you think that recovery is job one, right? I think that recovery is job one, performance is job number one, data quality, scalability, developer happiness, data security. I could just keep going on. I think that's the hard part about, you know, going from, I would say most accidental DBAs probably come from the pool of developers. I mean, sometimes it's data architects like me just because we know a little bit about relational databases, but that is getting used to being responsible for so many things up and down the stack and across the technology field that everyone thinks that their pain point is your number one job. I think that's the hard part. So in making this transition from accidental to professional, it really does cause a shift in mindset. You're not just changing hats or crowns. You're not just getting a better office. You're not just getting to hide out in a data center. Is that you have to remember that changing roles and responsibilities also needs to change how you think about things. And so my design mantra is everything comes down to cost, benefit, and risk, but I think that's really true about production support and other operational things. Every decision you make, there isn't just one right answer. It's not also that the answer is always it depends on a technology thing, but you could have a great solution that cost or risk doesn't really pan out. I think the other thing that I see my accidental DBAs struggling with is, you know, trying not to be process heavy, but also realizing that databases are highly shared resources, so we need to manage change, that we have to collaborate, we have to negotiate a lot, we need to have a sense of humor, and I think originally we tried to put snark on this slide, but some people confuse snark and sarcasm, but there really is sort of a mindset change as far as producing things, but also architecting and supporting things. In other words, a professional DBA needs to be mindful, aware of what's going on, observing what's going on, not getting overly attached to having a perfect outcome. It really is sort of a new way of thinking about things. The other think like a DBA is problem solving. So I find that production DBAs and development DBAs need to really work on their diagnoses and their problem-solving skills and their forensics, being able to dig deep into code and to previous designs that have been handed to you and vendor packages especially to try to figure out what the heck is going on. And that comes back to the don't panic. Don't just start flipping switches, running scripts, reading a blog, downloading a script, and running it. It means that we need to have a good testing mindset, but a testing mindset that spans projects. I think if you come from a developer set, you know, usually you're working on one or two applications at a time, and your testing is focused on making that application work. But if you're fixing a problem in production with a highly shared resource, it might work for one application and not work for the 20 other things that have been built around it. So the don't panic part also focuses on you need to be able to practice recovering, practice solving problems even outside of your normal job, and that being able to have a set of resources, scripts or tools that you use on a regular basis that you're highly familiar with, that you understand all the error message of, that becomes really important. The next one is, to doing the transition, is really developing prioritization skills, and not the same ones you had in your previous role. Databases often come with a different type of service level agreement or expected uptimes, again because they're highly shared. That means that we need to understand that if you optimize a response to one application, that often comes at the cost of all the other uses of the database. That means that people that use the databases, we need to be able to feel their pain and reflect it so that we understand it. And reflect it doesn't mean inflict it upon them, but to let people know that you understand that they'd really like to have these 3 tables denormalized all into one, but you need to explain to them that there are other applications that would actually harm the performance of their queries or their updates. One of the resources I've shared at the end of this is a blog post about fly the plane. Fly the plane is a saying used in aviation. That is, there's a whole lot of stuff you have to manage when you're flying a plane. But when something goes wrong, there have been all these incidents where the pilots forgot that their #1 job is to fly the plane and to not deal with all the other things that are going on around them unless the plane is actually flying and staying up in the air. And then the other thing is understanding that team members have different roles and that there are prep cook roles, the sous chefs, there are people that are supporting the production of meals in a restaurant, and that team-based approach is something that allows us to have both generalized skills as well as specialized skills so that we can get things done faster at a lesser cost with lesser risk. So we started thinking about, when we were putting the slide deck together, about the types of mistakes that accidental DBAs make. And you know, the ones that I observe is accidental DBAs tend to have a firefighting type mindset. And that firefighting mindset, it means that you're just constantly putting out fires and you don't have time to reduce the number of fires or to make even the flammability go away. Doing everything manually just takes a lot of time. It introduces a lot of risk, and no matter how wonderful you think your skills are, you're always going to make mistakes, especially under a lot of pressure. That also means that a lot of accidental DBAs don't understand the value of their time. So they might spend a lot of time doing things manually or throwing a bunch of scripts at a problem instead of constantly fine-tuning them and making them work in your environment. Another mistake that accidental DBAs make, or anyone with a new tool set, is just select all the options. You know, let's install everything on the server just in case. Let's put an index on every column in case it's needed. Let's, you know, create a bunch of file groups. Let's do all these things. And that's not what architecting a database is about. If we just selected all the options, we wouldn't need a DBA. We'd just have scripts. And the final one, the one that drives me crazy as a project manager, is people who think that the defaults in a tool set, meaning the settings, if you don't make any changes when you configure it, equal best practice. And I've had a lot of people tell me this. And in our slide here, you can see for the model database, the default auto growth is 1 megabyte, or by 10% for the log. That may or may not be in the best configuration for your database, or any database, I might say. So one of the other things in making the transition is not just thinking differently about being a professional DBA, but acting like one. And that means, as an accidental DBA, you need training. You need formal, hands-on training. You need informal reading and research and watching videos and all of those things. But most accidental DBAs, because you're so overwhelmed with new tools, new responsibilities, maybe confidence issues about your ability and your skills, people put off taking the training. But I think it's really important to insist upon time to do it and resources to do it. A real DBA wants to use checklists as much as we hate having them handed to us, is that you have no idea how your brain and your fingers and your tools and your laptop is going to work unless you have a checklist. Some people think of them as someone being a nanny to them. Having that checklist in front of you, did you actually do this step? Are you supposed to do this first or this first? Those really help, especially in times of pressure when your boss is standing over your shoulder saying, is it done? Is it done? Is it working? You need that checklist. And you need to practice executing that checklist. That means you need to ask for time and insist on time and environments and resources to be able to practice those things. And you need to be able to test them, which means you may need your own test environment. These are things that you don't put off when you become an accidental DBA until you get the skills. These are the things that you should be insisting that you have right away. And if your answer to the poll question was someone else quit and they didn't have these things, or auditors happened, or you wanted it to happen, these are the things that you need to want to have in front of you. So when I was thinking about the mistakes that DBAs make, accidental DBAs make, I asked on Twitter and some people responded, and I'm not going to go through all these, but like having an atomic energy lab toy for kids that actually came with radioactive materials, sometimes giving people production access isn't exactly the well thought out thing it is, because people make all of these mistakes. The other thing I asked on Twitter was if any of these people had actually made some of these mistakes, and I think a lot of the answers were yes. But everyone makes mistakes, whether you're accidental or not, and we'd love to hear about yours, even right now, but even throughout after the webinar, or if you're watching the recording, we'd like to hear about what sort of misunderstandings or myths or just mistakes that DBAs make. Tom, did you have anything to add to that?
No, except that, yeah, you do tweet a lot, so I expect that if somebody starts tweeting right now the accidental DBA mistakes that they've made, you'll be able to interact with them even while I go through the next few slides here.
Oh, I was doing it while I was talking, but yeah.
Oh, of course, of course. You're very talented.
Yes.
Okay, get me to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about food groups. I think that's next, right?
Yeah.
Or not.
You have control, so maybe it's just taking a second.
It's taking a second.
There you go.
There we go. All right, so a little thing I came up with a while back, and I've actually updated it recently, was the concept of food groups for a DBA. And it's usually this time of year, of course, we're always thinking about food. What Thanksgiving was last week, and the holidays coming up. So I've tried to, say, organize a lot of the things that you find yourself doing as a DBA, again, with the idea of putting some structure around what it is you need to be doing on a daily basis. And so the idea of food groups just came to me, where I'm thinking you got to do a little bit of this almost every day, certainly every week, definitely every month, but on a daily basis, I think you're going to find that you're going to get pulled in a lot of different directions. And so instead of thinking, oh my God, yet something else that's come on my plate, because that's usually what people say, what's on your plate, this is what you can tell people and say, I already know what's on my plate. I got a little bit of discovery, a little bit of recovery, a little performance, a little architecture, and a little side dish of security. This is what is on the DBA's plate each and every day. If you're like my son, you're probably not going to eat everything all at once, but you will, if you are my son, you will eat that, trust me. At some point, you will finish. Did I lose control again? Let me try this.
Probably.
Okay. See if that works better. I may just have to tell you to get me to the next slide, Karen, because this delay is not going to work for me.
Yeah. Well, I was answering a question, so I'll finish that question. I know.
There we go. So let's talk a little. It is. It is. Let's talk a little bit about discovery. One of the first things you're going to want to know if you're the accidental DBA is you've got to figure out exactly what you're responsible for. And I'm usually talking about the list of servers or the applications, figuring out what your role is. I've already mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit more about how recovery is really job one. But if you don't know the systems that you are expected to be responsible for, you're really going to struggle. People will come to you and say, hey, this application and it needs your help right now, and you've really got to know if you're the person that's supposed to be doing that. Early in my career, I had a lot of people coming to me for help with development. They said, here, go write this store procedure. And I looked at them, I go, well, wait a second. I'm more of the infrastructure guy, and I'm kind of in the middle of making sure we have disaster recovery taken care of first. So I had to ask my manager. I needed his help, and I said, so what am I responsible for? Am I supposed to be writing the code, or am I supposed to be administering and taking care of the servers and the databases and all that? And we had to talk about what the needs were. And of course, there were already 55, 60 developers on staff. So the idea, it became pretty clear that where they needed me was more, I was responsible for the recovery aspect of things first, and I could help with code second. So I really had to figure out where my job responsibilities were. One thing you can do is, you're going to want to do is create an inventory of the list of servers and systems that you're responsible for. Operations Manager was one tool I used. There's another tool, SQL PowerDoc out on Coplex. I have a slide for that in a second. Ops Manager was a great thing for me and my environment for my shop because it was a tool that we already had, and I leveraged that for my use. If you don't have tools like that, if you don't have a tool you can buy, there's a free tool, the SQL PowerDoc I mentioned as well. I do like to point out that I've seen some people try to document their environment by using the SQL commands -L option or flag. You should know that that is only going to return the SQL servers that are on the local network. So it's kind of an issue for people because sometimes they find, oh, I can find all SQL servers by using this little secret command. What they don't realize is it just gives you a little narrow view of what's in your environment. It actually doesn't give you everything. So you've got to be aware that of even some of these great free tools you might have some limitations about them. The other part of this discovery is communication, not just managers as I talked about before, but you've got to get out and talk with business users as well. Go to everybody you can, server admins, business users, managers, and say, so what do you think is the most important system here that I'm going to be responsible for? And what you're going to find is if everybody gave you their top 3 or 5 systems that you certainly have to take care of, it's going to allow you to say, well, if everybody answers the same system as the top one, then that's really the most important system for everybody. But for what's important for, say, in my experience, somebody that works front office versus the back office, right? The people doing the trading versus the people that do the accounting. Their view of what's the most important system is different than each other. But they have some common systems, right? They have some systems in common. So you've really got to figure out where the true business critical systems are and which ones you're going to be responsible for the most. I mentioned the SQL PowerDoc. I actually grabbed a quick screenshot. Let's see. Oh, Karen, I might need you again.
Yeah, no, it's coming. But now you're selecting control, so now you should be good after this one delay.
Oh, okay.
If it ever.
No?
There. Yep, okay. There it's there.
So a quick view of what the SQL PowerDoc out in Coplex looks like so that way you know if you're at the right spot. And you can go to sqlpowerdoc.coplex.com. Here's something put together by a DBA we know, Kendall Van Dyke. He's used PowerShell to help you go out and figure out exactly the SQL Server services on your network and collect information about them, including at the operating system level. This is a great tool for you to use and leverage as an accidental DBA because then you can go back to your managers and you can say, hey, were you aware of the scope of everything in the environment? Because you've asked me to be the accidental DBA, and you might think that, hey, we just have one database server. Guess what? We have 15 or 20 or 50. And it really helps people understand the scope and magnitude of your position there. So discovery, another dish on your plate would be, or another thing on your plate would be recovery. Quite simply, I tell people if you can't recover, and I think Steve Jones was the first one who said this, update resume, leave town, URLT. If you can't recover, then there's really no reason to have you. It's that simple. Your number one job is to be able to protect the data of the business. Without the data, your business will not exist. If you cannot recover, then you cannot continue. It's just that simple. I know people will say, nope, coding's number one, or performances, or security, and all that stuff. Doesn't matter. If the business comes to you and says, I need you to restore the production database from last night right now, because we had a problem, we had an issue, and we have to restart all of the processing. If you can't get that job done, ain't nothing else gonna matter, right?
We should so have a
focus
debate
on the
this.
recovery. Yeah, you can have a debate if you want, but you're wrong. You can debate with yourself, it's fine, but it's true. If you can't recover, then that's just it. You've got to know your recovery plan. You've got to understand the recovery plan. If your recovery plan is, say VM snapshots and you're not really doing database backups, you better understand that those are really two different things. If you cannot put the data back into a transactionally consistent state, then you are going to have trouble keeping your job as a DBA. Verifying the backups are working as expected, that's always a good thing to do. There's a code. I have a little sample for you in a second. Testing the restores as well. I have a link at the end where I wrote this article on Simple Talk a while back that said basically the only way to test to make sure that the backup was successful is if you can restore it. Right? This is all part of the recovery plan in general. But how many people actually test the restores? Many of us would just make sure the backups are running. Yeah, the backup, it's there, it's fine. But testing the entire process. So for me, that might mean, hey, grabbing a database at random and saying to those guys on the server team, can you recover from tape? Can you go tell Iron Mountain or whoever you're using and say, recover that particular tape so I can restore the database. And knowing how long it takes. It's supposed to take 2 days. Did it really take 2 days? And just documenting it and making sure that the entire process works as expected. And you're only going to do that if you actually try to test some of these restores. I think there's an example of a script I put together a while back. You can go to tinyurl.com, verify backups, to copy the script real quick if you'd like. But this just gives you an understanding of the database name, how many hours since the last full backup, and how many hours since the last differential or incremental backup. So the negative one simply means that it never happened. 476 obviously means it's been a while, a few weeks since the last backups. I use this information because in my environment, I needed to have a full backup done at least weekly and a differential done nightly. And then I could just build an alert, and I could say, well, if it's 169 hours since the last full backup, that might be an issue for me to look into. And if it's been 25 hours since the last differential, that's an issue for me to look into. So the code is not very complex. It's just the idea that inside of the system databases, in this case MSDB, you can get information about the backups that have been happening for your databases. This is going to help you with the recovery process because you can't recover unless you have a backup. So again, this example of a code to kind of help you along. Let's see. Let's talk performance, something else on your plate. Dynamic management objects. Some people call them DMVs. They're really DMVs and DMFs make up these dynamic management objects. I point people to here when it comes to performance. I want people to understand more about how SQL Server works, though. And in order to do that, I want people to grasp the concept of weights and queues. So for accidental DBAs, the idea of trying to performance tune something can be daunting. There's so much inside of the engine for you to understand and say, hey, maybe the problem's here, maybe the problem's there. But if you look at and read this white paper written by Tom Davidson at Microsoft back in 2005, it is Weights and Queues Performance Tuning Methodology. I have a link to it at the end. When you start to understand how SQL Server actually processes a request, when this connection is made and a session is created and a request is sent to the engine, the idea that it can go through one of three states. It's either the request is either running, runnable, or suspended. When it's suspended, it logs what resource weight it is waiting for. And that's when you find out if the query is truly waiting on one of these bottlenecks, disk, memory, CPU, or network, or perhaps locking and blocking. And that's it. When you think of those 5 resource bottlenecks, and honestly, it doesn't even matter what database platform we're talking about. Like, we're focused on SQL Server for this particular talk, but Oracle, Sybase, DB2, they all have the same concept of resource bottlenecks and weights, right? And I don't care if you're running Linux, Unix, or Windows either. You are going to wait for disk, memory, CPU, network, or some locking and blocking. That's just how the systems work. So when you start to understand that concept and you start to think of things in terms of buckets, it really makes performance tuning that much easier for you to comprehend, especially if you are the accidental DBA. Now you think to yourself, well, it's got to be one of these things. And I can tell, for example, that for whatever reason you just say, I know it's not CPU. So you can rule that out. So you can rule out network. If you can start narrowing your focus, it makes you a lot more productive, a lot more efficient, a lot faster. If you are going to be doing weights and queues, I tell people you really need to be able to have some sort of trend analysis as well. A free tool for you to use is the Management Data Warehouse. That comes with SQL Server. You can install, set up. It starts collecting information for you. The trend analysis is going to help you understand, basically, you have to answer two questions. One, if you're looking at a performance problem, one, is this really a problem? And two, well, what can you do about it? And that's where the weights and queues come in. Is this a problem? You're only going to know if it's a problem if you have some historical analysis to compare it to. Many times somebody will come to me and say, I'm having an issue, here's the issue, you got to fix it right now. And you look at it and you can say, okay, the query you're telling me to look at, I can see it running, and I can see that last week it was running, and the time today is the same time as last week. Oh, yeah, but it needs to be faster now because of some other reason. Oh, so the performance is the same, but a requirement changed. That's a different story altogether. You can't just walk over here and say, fix things because they're bad. They're actually not bad. They're the same as they were, and I've got the data to show it. And you don't get that unless you're doing some sort of trend analysis. So I really like to point people in that direction and make sure they understand they've got to start collecting some data on the performance and focus on those weights and queues. I also like to talk about maintenance. We mentioned recovery is a big part of it. Backups are a big part of it. But if you also want performance, you want to make sure performance is happening at, say, a standard, you want to make sure you're looking at some sort of index maintenance, updating statistics, things of that nature. If you're not doing those types of activities, you should be doing them. Monitoring for things like disk space is another big thing. Of course, that leads to alerts, which we'll talk about now as well. As an accidental DBA, I would monitor for disk space. I want to know how much free disk space there was and database sizes and things like that. But then that would also lead to the idea of me being alerted. And what I found was, as my environment grew, what I came to realize was there are certain things that I'd be alerted for, but there was nothing I could do about it at all. So what I realized was that there's a concept of alerts. For me, alerts require an action. If I'm going to be interrupted in my day by an alert, then that means there's something I need to take action upon immediately. If there's no action for me to take, then it's simply information. And that means everything else can wait. If there's no action for me, I don't want to be interrupted. Log it somewhere. Log it to a file for me to review when it's time for me to review that. Otherwise, I don't want to be interrupted to be told, oh, hey, by the way, the batch load completed successfully. Did I need an alert for that? No, not at all. So it's one thing I try to make sure that accidental DBAs understand is that they can be flooded with alerts from a lot of these different tools like Operations Manager. You can just get a whole bunch of alerts and stuff that you're like, hey, am I supposed to look at this stuff? Is it serious? What does this all mean? You know what? If there's nothing for you to take action upon, then stop having it alert you and focus on making sure that the alerts that come to you are only for action. I think, yeah, so I have a quick example of scripts. Some scripts from Ola Hallegren. He's a SQL Server MVP as well. He's been making these scripts for, I want to say, 15 years, maybe longer. He has been building these scripts for just so long now, and they are the gold standard currently for all of us. Anytime somebody says, hey, I've got a new SQL Server, and they want to talk about maintenance plans, we usually say, don't use maintenance plans. If you're starting something new, maintenance plans, try using these scripts, because these scripts give you a lot more flexibility than what a maintenance plan can do for you. So there's scripts you can go to Ola Hallegren. You can download the full maintenance solution. It's one script. That's what you see on the left is actually the header from that one script. And then it will create, as you see on the right-hand side, a whole bunch of different jobs for you to go through and say, all right, so I'm backing up my databases. I'm checking my integrity. I'm optimizing my indexes. Like I said, wonderful scripts for you to have as an accidental DBA. Get these loaded onto your systems as soon as you can. And let's see. Security.
Yay.
Yeah, security. Nobody ever really wants to talk about security. It's always, I have it as that side dish, right? It's one of those kind of forgotten things.
Yeah,
Security,
Kendall actually had a great, in the tweets that are on the tweet cloud previously,
yeah.
he talks about people, or no, it was Michael Swart, sorry. Michael Swart said people don't want to worry about security because it's not usually a daily pain point, but when it becomes a pain point, oh my gosh, does it hurt.
Right. It really does. It is one of those things that kind of gets forgotten. In my experience, security was really handled, or supposed to be handled by a different team because there was a separation of duties. My role as a DBA, the head of the DBA team there, wasn't really, I wasn't creating groups inside of Active Directory. I wasn't actually allowing users to be assigned to groups inside of Active Directory. There was another team to handle that part. I didn't go out around encrypting data. I would encrypt data at the request of if a business unit or a developer said, we need to be encrypting this, right? So my idea of security is a little different than others because every shop is different. But as a DBA, you need an awareness of what's happening around you. The simple thing is just logging into a SQL Server, understanding the difference between using Windows authentication or what we call a proprietary account, in this case a SQL login. Most database systems have what we call proprietary accounts. You don't necessarily need a Windows account to log into something like a Sybase or an Oracle or DB2. The easy one to say is just simply SA, right? SA is a SQL login, has nothing to do with Windows authentication. But you have to understand the difference for how people can actually connect. You have to understand that if somebody comes to you and they say, hey, we need to use encryption, well, what is that really going to mean? That means certificates. That means backing up certificates. That means a little more overhead on your part in order to make sure that, again, you can recover. Access and permissions are usually where people think about security. They're like, hey, make sure this person can only access or only read data, things of that nature. But there's a lot more to it. What about backup security? What about making sure that your backups are protected? They're on disk, but maybe you want to encrypt the backup as well. Making sure that whoever is taking care of your backups as they leave and they're off of server, right, to the server tape, and that tape goes to a place like an Iron Mountain, are they really secure? Or are those tapes just sitting in somebody's cube for days and weeks on end, and anybody can just grab a handful of tapes and walk off with your backups, right? So you're going to want to make sure those are taken care of. There's this whole concept of security, information, and event management, the idea of logging, auditing all of the activity. Who's accessing your data? What were they doing? So we have security and monitoring listed here, but that's what I'm talking about, is where you want the idea of, hey, do I need to be logging all this information, or what information is really are the auditors looking for? How can we get that done in I want to say, an easy way or something that won't consume as much resources? There's also this concept of using production data down in dev and test, which, of course, that's all anybody ever wants, right, Karen? You have to take the production data. I'm not going to sign off on these reports, on these changes in tests, unless they match the production ones, right?
Maybe for migrations, but that's it. And I don't consider that dev testing. That's like staging and pre-production. But yeah, I'm not a fan at all. And in some places, it's illegal, like most of Europe and parts of Canada, to use real live sensitive data outside of its production uses. So not something I like. And I can't get my mouse back. Here we go. So one of the things we recommend is Denny Cherry's book on securing SQL Server, and it's in 3rd edition. It's the newest one you want. I'm going to talk a little bit about architecture. Oh, and Tom, there's some questions in the queue that I couldn't answer because I couldn't use my mouse, so if you can try to start answering those while I'm talking, that'd be great. Okay. The architecture part of the food groups is, I could talk for hours on this, and we don't have hours, but the biggest sort of accidental DBA misunderstandings in this area is this ongoing confusion between high availability and disaster recovery. And a lot of times this confusion comes about because they use similar technologies, clusters and nodes and copies of your data and mirrors and replication, but they aren't the same thing. And their architectures are optimized for different outcomes, and they should be different. So if you've got someone telling you that your disaster recovery strategy is the same thing as high availability, or your high availability solution is you don't need disaster recovery, you need to realize that as a DBA, those are different things and they have different cost, benefit, and risks. And therefore, using one solution for both those, a lot of people are forced to do that, but setting expectations is really important here. The next is understanding, and I get this all the time as a database designer and architect, that a transactional database is designed differently than an analytical one or analysis one or reporting one. We optimize different things. Transaction, we're optimizing for data integrity, and for reporting, we're optimizing definitely for query performance. We do a little bit of that on both sides, but they are two different data stories. And I think it's important to understand that the days of using a single database to do both is something I call Olaf, which doesn't really stand for anything, but a great character from the flick Frozen. Let's just say he was a special snowman that liked warm hugs and fell apart a lot, which is exactly what your OLAF database is going to do. Mixed use doesn't scale, and it might be a temporary solution to a burning problem. Just, start running your queries against your transactional system, but not a good way to go. So being able to answer that question of where should the data live and what structure should it have, that's something that a professional DBA should understand. So for doing this right, as a professional DBA, I think one of the most important skills to have is empathy. Again, feeling other people's pain, because the shared resource is trying to be everything to everybody, and people want their DBAs to be everything to everybody, and we know how frustrating that is. So you need to reflect their pain, but that doesn't mean you have to be a pushover. It doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything, but maybe you're going to say yes more often. You're going to say, yes, I can do that, but this is what it'll take. Yes, I can denormalize this structure. Yes, I can add this index. Or, yes, I can help you with your script, but now I need you to do this for me. It also means in talking like a DBA, you're going to get your terms right, your terminology and everything, but you're not going to be pedantic about it. You're not going to go around correcting everybody. But as you transition from being what I'll call a pre-professional DBA to a professional DBA, it's important to use the right terms. So something that drives me crazy as an architect is hearing the Oracle DBA correct the SQL Server DBA, because those two technologies use slightly different terms, sometimes same term for different things. I think one of the things that we all learn as an experienced IT professional is to not over-trust ourselves, that we continue to need to practice recovery, practice running scripts, practice using tools, that we need to have a sounding board for when we're thinking about a solution. And indeed, the more stress that we're under because we're fixing a production problem, the more we should be talking them through. That doesn't mean you're weak in the skills. It means you're a professional. Sorry. And I think it means that you need to decide who you want to be in a meeting. Do you want to be Mr. Right or Mr. Right Now? Or Ms., of course. It means, you shouldn't think of being a DBA as being, a zero-sum game where someone always wins or always loses. IT and teamwork is about collaboration. So Tom, I think you were going to go through the 7 tips, but I'll start with this first one. Of the first step is always admit to you and to everyone else you have a problem. Maybe not so much that you are the problem or that you made the problem, but being an accidental DBA usually means that there are some things you need to ask for.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's admitting you have a problem is always the first step in any solution, right? So if we're going to talk about 7 things you can do to solve the accidental DBA problem, the first thing is you have to admit this, right? So as a management has to admit that the DBA role is critical. How many times do we hear of a company where we don't really have a DBA? But yet the company has data. You know there are databases around, so why is there no DBA? So you have to admit, everybody has to agree that this role is an important role for the business to have. So that's part of the things that have to be admitted. The other thing is you as an individual have to admit, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I have a problem here. I don't know I haven't discovered everything yet. I don't know that the recovery plan works yet. You have to admit that there are things that are maybe outside your control right now and that this is a problem and you have to get this under control somehow. So I say the first thing is admit you have a problem. But then spend some time in discovery. Again, a beautiful shot of our girl there, right? Mm-hmm. Spend some time in discovery. So what does that really mean? Spend some time figuring out, what it is that you're responsible for. But it's not just that. It's not just discovering what you're responsible for. There's more to discovery. There's discovering more about yourself too. It's what you do know, or then understanding that there's, no matter how much you do know, there's probably a lot more out there that you don't know. And getting an idea of the fact that you should always be learning. That's kind of an important thing as well. Reaching out to the business units we talked about, all the stuff that we had mentioned a little bit earlier about what to do in discovery. But that's a huge part of it as well. The next step, making sure you have the ability to recover. And we talked a little bit about that. And again, I mentioned somebody had a question about how much time should be spent on backup and recovery. It's actually a lot more time up front making sure you have everything in place. Getting the code set up to make sure the backups are running, then verifying the backups are running, then being able to test the restore infrequently, making sure that the entire process is working. It's a lot more time up front to make sure that's in place, and it's a lot less time later on because everything should be running, the control reports should be there. But that's going to be another step. Next, giving yourself that feeling of security. So knowing, basically understanding more about just access and permissions, that there's a lot more to security, understanding the implications of what encryption might mean or what's really needed for the auditors, that type of stuff. Understanding a little bit more about what is needed in your role when it comes to providing the security necessary for your data. Again, if your business doesn't have data, you don't have a business. It's that simple. Next, shifting your focus to performance, right? Again, a lot of people say, hey, if you're the DBA, performance, that's job one, as Karen put it. You've got some other things to take care of first, but my favorite is when somebody says, they come to you and they say, hey, something's wrong, something's changed, or something is bad, something's running slow today, and then you ask the question, well, what's changed since yesterday? And of course the answer is always nothing. Nothing's changed. No code changes. This code's been fine. It's been there for 10 years. Nothing's changed. Hey, you know what has changed? The data. The data's changed. You built something 10 years ago that was meant to hold, I don't know, it was meant to hold 1,000 rows, and today it has 10,000 rows. And you say performance is bad. Your database has a design, just like a ship or a car has a design, right? It can only go so far so fast with what it has. So when people come to me and they're always saying, nothing's changed, you've got to go fix it, my first thought eventually became the idea, no, I know it's changed. The data's changed. You loaded the staging tables last night, and the indexes haven't been updated, things of that nature. There's always something that has changed. And when you shift your focus to performance, it does come down to those two questions. Is this a problem, and what can I do about it? I have another tip in here. I say managing the expectations. Once you've done your discovery, once you've figured out what you're responsible for, once you get a hold of all that, you've really got to sit down and make sure people, you can manage the expectations of you, right? So that means you talk about things that are called service level agreements, SLAs. If somebody says, hey, I need a login, well, how long should it take to, create a login or get somebody access to SQL Server? Well, it actually only takes a few minutes in reality. But if you could imagine in a large environment, if you can imagine, those requests might come through fairly frequently, right? And if they do, it could consume most of your day because you keep getting interrupted for it. So that might be one of those things where you say, all right, let me just make sure that you understand I'm going to address all the logins once a day. So it might take me a day to get to you because I'm going to be doing these other things. And that's a conversation where you say, all right, so here's the SLAs for this. Here's the SLA for me recovering a database. Usually we talk about that in RTO and RPO, but you've really got to sit down and you've got to say, all right, this is what I'm responsible for. I see what you're expecting of me, and this is what I can deliver. Lastly is developing a communication plan. Remember that people often say they have no idea what a DBA does because usually the best DBAs are the ones you actually never see, because usually if you do have to talk to a DBA, something's gone horribly wrong. Right. If you do have to talk to a DBA, usually something's gone wrong. So you have to develop this communication plan and say, all right, so these are all the things I'm working on. This is the stuff we've accomplished. Hey, by the way, let you know, end of life for SQL 2000. It's actually already happened. We still have a handful of servers running SQL 2000. We should probably figure out something to do with these old servers. Communicating that out, letting people see your value. The last thing you want to do is to sit down with somebody, especially a new boss of yours, and have them look at you and go, so what is it you do here? That kind of tells you that your days are numbered, right? If people don't see the value of having you around, and they're only going to see that if you can communicate things out and openly. Let's see. And don't forget, oh, we actually didn't mention SQL Help. There's a great resource, the SQL Help hashtag. You want to talk about that, Karen?
Yeah, so just on Twitter, if you have a question about SQL Server or SQL or data stuff, I'll even say, you can post your question to the SQL Help hashtag, and hundreds of famous SQL Server people will all rush to be the first one to answer your question. And you can get a lot of good tips and pointers. People are really volunteering their time on Twitter to do that. A lot of MVPs are out there do that. A lot of MVP wannabes are out there doing that. It's a great resource. And even if you haven't signed up for Twitter, you can go read things on Twitter under that hashtag and learn some things there too. Get my mouse back. So one of the last things on our agenda was that I think you should have happy data, databases, and users because you love your data. For me, having happy data and users means that you're known for doing the right things at the right time, at the right cost, for the right amount of risk, with the right benefits, and that you should also, to be happy yourself, is don't forget to be grateful for this opportunity, as hard as it is to be a professional DBA. I mean, I think it's pretty cool, but I'm a data chick. So we said today that we wanted to talk about how to make that transition. So we've skimmed across the top of the things that you need to do and how to do it right. Tom talked about the 5 DBA food groups. There are probably some other side things that you could do, but these are the things that we think are the essential. We talked about how this happened to you with the poll, how to do it right, and the 7 tips. Do you want to close it out, Tom?
Oh, sure. So, get control back. I think we're at the end. This is the last slide.
Yeah.
Yes, congratulations. You are the new DBA. I think one of the most important things, of course, is don't panic. Understanding, putting some structure around what the role really means, and making sure that you feel comfortable and not overwhelmed. I know I certainly felt overwhelmed a lot early on in my career. Most people, you know, being a DBA means a lot of different things, and I think by putting the structure, especially in those 5 DBA food groups, you get an understanding of where your responsibilities really are, and you put that structure around what is really a big unknown. That's why people say, what does a DBA even do around here? We have a whole bunch of links here. I have, let's see, there's a blog post about being a minimalist DBA, which I think at least gives people a good introduction. There's the Weights and Queues white paper, some scripts for verifying backups and sampling database backups, the SQL Power Doc, the scripts from OLA, a link to the book for securing SQL Server, and then a link for Karen's Fly the Dang Plane post over at Dataversity as well. Lots of good resources to help you get started. And I think with that, I think we are at the last one, which is me saying legally.
Yeah.
Could you advance that? What happened? There you go.
Yeah,
Thank you.
There's that. Thank you. And I was just going through and looking at, I think we got most of the questions. Someone has asked a specific question about a SQL Server issue due. I really want to encourage everyone, when you have a specific question, post them over on Twitter at the SQL Help hashtag or on your favorite forum. Most of these types of questions aren't things that we can answer in a webinar, and it's much easier for all of us in the SQL community to answer your questions in a public forum because everyone can benefit. People can then go bing a question that they have and find the answers and the discussions and the it depends that went on there. Someone has asked to see the happy data slide again. I have no idea why. Maybe they just want to be happy, right? Anyway. So yeah, be grateful. That's what I want you to be. Do we have suggestions for training? One of the things is that we'll probably be doing a post-webinar blog, at least I know for sure I will, and I'm going to talk about a lot of the tips that we have with even more resources. We tried to make the slide deck chock full of resources, but I'll be collecting some of those as we go. If you have resources to share for training or stuff, you could tweet them using our hashtag of accidental DBA mistakes, and that, again, is something in public that everyone can benefit from. Did you have something, Tom?
Yeah, I did. There's just one question here from Aaron, and I think he's still online. He's saying whenever data transferring is happening, the database is a disaster. How can we get a point in time? So I'm not really sure if he's talking about getting a point in time recovery.
Yeah.
If you're looking for just performance general, I mean, management data warehouse is always a good thing to at least start with. There are some third-party tools. I can certainly recommend some third-party tools if you're concerned about performance, if that's what he means by disaster. But if you're talking about point in time in terms of restores, then what I'm going to do is just tell you the quick answer is making sure that you're doing frequent transaction log backups. So, and then having an SLA. So, for example, we were doing transaction log backups every 15 minutes, and that was for our tier 1, we would say, our most critical apps, and we always told people the best we would do is we would restore you quickly within a certain amount of time, and we'd be able to put you back within the past 15 minutes, and that was just agreed upon. So I wasn't really sure what the real question was that he was trying to get to there, so I figured I'd just address it real quick. Other than that.
Yeah, there's one more. What about database design for the accidental DBA? Can you recommend a good resource? Well, so I think there's a little bit of data modeling involved. So my #1 recommended data modeling book is Simpson and Witt's Data Modeling Essentials. And then for database design, I think it really depends on the type of database, like whether it's transactional or data warehouse. There's some classic books there. But I find when I'm trying to get the tool-specific stuff, I'm more drawn to less things than books, but more hands-on training and seminars and things like the PASS Summit. But it is harder to get design advice than backup and restore and scripting advice, I think, because it takes a lot longer to talk about design issues than it does, you know, here are the 5 data types that you can choose from and those types of things. But there's a lot more work happening in all those as well. So I'll try to pull up some blog posts or to write one recommending those design things. So excellent question.
Okay, and it's top of the hour.
Yep.
So I think we got to pull the plug on this one.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Well,
great VC.
I really appreciate, we at DBAFundamentals really appreciate both of you a lot, and this was a great primer for DBA starting out. Let's take care of the last thing, and that's awarding the Amazon gift card that goes to Lori Carr. And the session is being recorded and will be available at our site. And lots of people have asked about the slides, and they should be on our site as well as Karen's and Tom's. So we'll make sure that you can get them somewhere. And we really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.